Hi, welcome to Smith and Grezzy, podcast number 7. I've got a question here that's going to cause a few discussions, and that is, Sandy, what constitutes a championship section band?
Right, okay. Off the top of my head, there are lots of different ways of answering that. I suppose one of the main things is you would have to go with contest results, wouldn't you? You would have to,
I
I'm
would think
trying to
so,
play.
and it's not one-offs either.
No,
It's consistency.
I'm trying to sort of think of playing devil's advocate here. You could quite justifiably have any band who is graded as a championship section band in any of the regions now saying, we're championship section, we've earned the right. We've fought our way up through the other sections and we're now top section and we've earned the right to be there. So we're a championship section band. That's
Yeah,
one way of looking at it.
But my point, Sandy, is I feel that in the championship section as it is, that we really have got at least a couple of sections within a section.
Yeah, that's a good argument. I think you could probably argue that is quite true.
We certainly found that at Yorkshire area, didn't we?
Well, yeah, I think that let's look at the championship section bands by region in Britain. Okay, so these are the 8 regions, and if I go through them and just read you out the number of bands that each region has numerically, in its championship section. So Scotland 10, North of England 9, Yorkshire 12, the Northwest 12, Midlands 12, Wales 8, London and Southern Counties 12, West of England 11. So 12 seems to be it looks like people are trying to sort of get that to 12. There are a couple of regions slightly under that, 2 or 3, 4 of them actually. But 12 bands in each region. That gives us a total of 86 championship section bands. Now, I see what you're saying about how many of those bands are truly competitive in that.
Well, this is a question for me. I don't think there's that many.
Yeah.
You know, you look in Yorkshire, I mean, we had Blackdyke, Brighouse, Grimethorpe, and then you've got your likes of Hammonds creeping in.
Frickley, Rothwell.
Yeah, Rothwell.
Yeah.
And after that, they were struggling, weren't they? Oh, and Carlton Main, sorry.
Yeah, Frickley. Hepworth didn't do so bad. There are various degrees of struggling, though. Struggling in Yorkshire might be a totally different thing to struggling in one of the other regions.
No, what I mean, Sandy, is could they? I mean, Blackdyke won the contest. How many of them bands can realistically knock on Blackdyke's door regularly?
Regularly?
Yeah.
Yorkshire bands?
I don't think there's many.
Brighouse?
Yep.
Occasionally. Then you're into occasionally then, aren't you?
Yeah.
Occasionally Hammonds, occasionally Grimy. Occasionally 1 or 2 others, Frickley. They have won the area in the last, in the foreseeable past. But yeah, what you're basically saying is a big contest, how many of those bands are truly competitive against the top bands?
So we're looking at around 6 in Yorkshire.
Probably.
So then you could go over to the northwest then, Sandy, and you've got Fordens, obviously.
Yeah,
they're playing stunningly well at the minute.
Yeah, and they're obviously the band of that region at the moment.
You've got our old band Fairies.
Yeah.
They keep knocking on the door, and you've got maybe Leyland, and there's this little spanner in the works, Oldham.
Yeah.
Now, you look at the northwest. How many of them bands can compete with Blackdyke?
Foden's,
Yeah,
obviously.
definitely. You see where I'm coming from? I don't feel like
no,
it's
I see
balanced.
what you mean. Well, we can look at the big contest results in a bit.
Mm,
I mean, one other thing I would say about um, what constitutes a championship section band. Winning one big contest does not make you a top band.
no way, no.
Because I remember years and years ago, one contest, there was a band, an unfancied band, maybe one. And I remember reading an article, and one of the players said, uh, "Yeah, yeah, we always knew we were a top band." Yeah, I can almost remember that word for word. Nearly spat me porridge out that morning. Um, and I thought, winning a contest, see, to me, that it's only one aspect of it. I mean, for me, being in a top band is producing the same sort of standard every time. See, if you're lucky enough to get that pot, right, the national trophy, as we call it, the pot. If you
Yeah,
have the pot or the shield and you're taking them around all your concerts, right?
yeah,
You turn up at Shrewsbury Town Hall or Scarborough Baths or wherever the hell it is, right? Those people are rightly entitled to hear the national or the British Open champions performing to that standard, right?
playing at the top of the game.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
there's a lot more to it than just winning a contest that makes you a top one. It's doing it week in, week out, turning up on a chilly February Saturday night with the
yeah,
rain chucking it down, and you've still got to perform. You'd be stuck on the motorway or whatever to get to wherever you're going, and all that sort of jazz.
yeah,
And it's doing it all the time. It's doing it in recordings, it's doing it in concerts, it's doing it in rehearsals. It's turning up every week,
yeah,
playing to the same sort of standard all the
yeah,
time.
yeah,
I think that's one of the things that does it. And likewise, an odd, really duff result. Okay,
yeah.
um, that doesn't mean if you've garnered a good reputation over a number of years for a standard of performance that people expect,
Yeah.
right? One odd result doesn't change the fact that, oh, that they're suddenly a bad band. There was
No.
one just a couple of weeks ago, wasn't there?
Oh yeah, that one at where was it? Lidgate?
I can't remember.
Which Friday? It was Lidgate.
It
I
was
nearly spit me porridge out that morning when I saw that.
So, I mean, Foden's, as expected, that's a bit disingenuous to Foden's. They obviously work bloody hard for winning the Tameside Whit Friday contest every year, and they
Yeah,
have to keep doing it. And this is what we're on about, doing it time and time and time again. And they got, I don't know how many firsts. They got about 7 or 8 firsts, 2 or 3 seconds, a third, and whatever
yeah,
else, and a 16th. Right. So whatever happened there, bit of a glitch in the matrix.
yeah,
Um, yeah, it'd be very hard to accept that there were 15 bands better than Foden's at that contest. So God knows what went on there. But
yeah,
it's Foden's have a reputation for being a very, very top band. Okay,
yeah.
and that has been garnered over a number of years. They will not be judged by the fact that they got 16th at Lidgate,
No,
right? That's a glitch. So that doesn't make them a bad band. And I would argue also winning one contest doesn't make you necessarily a top band.
no.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, me and you, we've been lucky to play in bands that have been regularly winning pots.
Yeah.
Now, 1993, we both played with Fairies, and I actually
Yeah.
left Fairies because I had other commitments, and I went to join YBS
Hmm.
1994. I had it in my mind that I was taking a step back in standard. Little
Okay.
did I know the speed that they would improve, but
Yeah.
YBS at that time wasn't a top band. They had to work for it. And it was only when they'd won a couple of Europeans and an Open, and I started to think, actually, I'm now playing in a top band again.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I get that. Um, I get that. I think that's fair comment. But again, you could argue that because you went with that attitude, that this, for most people going to a band, even in the state YBS was in at the time you joined them, that would have been the most wonderful banding they'd ever done.
Yeah.
But for you, who was used to winning, you were winning stuff at Dyke and then at Fairies, that wasn't enough.
No.
But you probably they engendered an attitude in that band that meant that they were going to work really, really hard to achieve long-term success.
Yeah.
That to me is more about what being a top band is. If you have a look at the top and the bottom, so the top 6 finishers and the bottom 6 finishers at the Albert Hall and the Open, it tells quite a story, actually.
It does. It does.
Do you want me to start just reading out the
Go on.
Albert Hall? So we went through this and had a look at the top 6 finishers by region in the last 10 contests at the Albert Hall. So that there is no contest in 2020.
Yeah.
That was shut for COVID. So this is, we're not bands, not specific bands, but just by region. The number of top 6 finishes by region in the last 10 contests at the Albert Hall. Northwest, 12. So there's been 12 bands from the Northwest finished in the top 6. Okay. Yorkshire, 21.
Wow.
In Yorkshire. 1 band from the Midlands. 2 bands from Scotland, or 2 appearances. 17 from Wales.
Wow.
London and Southern Counties, 0. No band from London and Southern Counties has finished in the top 6 at London in the last 10 contests. North of England, 0. And the west of England, 7.
Wow, that's incredible from the west.
Yeah, I mean, okay, you would have to say there's a fair amount of those are flowers. They've been very successful, but there are 1 or 2 others just pop in there occasionally as well.
Okay, Sandy. So if you go to the Royal Albert Hall, the bottom 6 finishes by region over the last 10 contests, the Northwest has 6, Yorkshire has 5, the Midlands 9, Scotland 7, Wales 12, London and Southern Counties 9, the north of England have got 11, and the west of England have got 1.
Yeah, again, that tells some of that is sort of you would expect, right? Some of the things are slightly unexpected. So look at west of England, only 1 band is finished in the bottom 6. That's a really commendable thing. So what you're basically saying is there, a lot of the west of England bands are holding their own at London, and they're in that sort of mid, 7 to 12, 13 area. They're holding their own. But if you look at
Wales,
had 9.
Look at Wales.
Yeah, but
that's astounding.
Really, you think so? It's not really when you think of it, because this is what's been happening. Your first 4 bands at London, the top 4, pre-qualify for the next year.
Yeah.
Right? So Wales have 17 top 6 finishers. Most of them are in the top 3 or 4. And it's always
Tredegar and Corey looks like they're consistently qualifying.
Yeah.
And so the rest of the Wales region, because remember it was only, I think it was about 8 in that region. Yeah, that's right. Only 8. So basically, nearly all that, there's half of Wales getting through to the finals.
Yeah, but I mean, what it's doing is Tredegar and Corey are qualifying in the top 4 at the Albert Hall very regularly, right?
Yeah.
What that allows then is that when it gets back to the following regional contest, the area, the following March, Corey and Tredegar are already qualified. You've got 2 more Welsh bands given the opportunity.
Yep.
To go to London, which is great, and that's the way the system is set up at the minute. But those bands are struggling.
They are
when they get to the Albert Hall, right?
So and this brings back to my point, Sandy. How many bands in Wales can compete with Black Dyke? There's only obviously 2.
Oh yeah, I would think that's not being disingenuous to anybody.
No.
Those when we're talking about bands like Dyke, Corey, Fodens, Brighouse, Jadiga.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think anybody would argue at the moment that those are the top 5 bands in the country.
Yeah.
You'd argue maybe about the way that those would be sort of hierarchied. Is that a word? You know, in people's
Yeah.
minds. But once you get over the first 5, you start to sort of disagree with a few more. But I don't think there's any disagreement that those 5 bands are, at the moment, set apart. There are still
No.
some bands out with those 5 that could be competitive with them. But
Yeah.
if you look back to the 86 championship section bands, how many of that, you know, you take the top 5, you take Dyke, Corey, Brighouse, Fodens and Tredegar out of the equation, that leaves 81 bands. How many of those 81 are going to really be regularly competing against those 5? They're not, are they?
They're not. No.
The vast majority. And it's interesting just to see what the, you know, top 6 finishers, London and Southern Counties 0, North of England 0. But the bottom 6, that jumps to 9 from London and 11 from the North of England.
Yeah.
You know, it begins to show exactly where the strength is over a period of time. And this is what we're saying about bands, that their credentials are made up over a longer period of time.
Yeah, it's plainly obvious from that.
It is, as to where the strength. If you look at the British Open, there is uncanny similarity between the top 6 at the Albert Hall by region and the top 6 at the Open by region in the last 10 contests. Now, there was no 2020 or 2021 at the Open.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've done the last contest, last 10.
The last 10 contests, yeah.
Yeah.
So if I just go through these, and we have an extra element in this, that we have foreign bands as well, because the foreign bands now get in, 1 or 2 get an invite to the Open. So these are the top 6 finishers by region in the last 10 contests at the British Open. Northwest 12, Yorkshire 22, Midlands 3, Scotland 2, Wales 13, London and Southern Counties 0, North of England 0, West of England 3, and foreign bands. It's mainly European, but there is a New Zealand band in there, Wellington, I think, 5. So they're from
that
5.
That is uncanny.
So, I mean, if you just look, some are exactly the same. Northwest, 12
you've only got
at
1 or 2
Hall,
different.
12 at the Open. Yorkshire, 21 at the Albert Hall, 22 at the Open. Midlands, 1 at the Albert Hall, 3 at the Open. Scotland, 2 each time. 2 for the Open, 2 for London. Wales, 17 for the Albert Hall, 13 for the Open. London and Southern Counties, 0. The same as the Albert Hall.
Yeah.
North of England, 0. West of England, 3. So that's slightly down. And 5 foreigners. So there's an uncanny similarity to the top 6 finishers. So what this is pointing to is to where the strength lies, certainly regionally.
Yeah.
You know, but it tends to be the same sort of bands all the time.
Well, the bottom 6 finishers by region in the British Open, this is quite uncanny as well.
Yeah.
The Northwest 12, Yorkshire 18, the Midlands has got 7, Scotland have got 9, Wales 5, London and Southern 0, North of England 4, West of England 3, and then the foreign visitors 2.
So there's a couple of stats there that's come out for me.
Yeah.
First one is Yorkshire has 18 finishers in the bottom 6, right? Which people might think, oh, crikey, that's... Yeah, but what you've got to remember is, because of the qualification process, there are a hell of a lot more Yorkshire bands
in the British Open.
In the British Open than there are at London.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's why that number is so high. Some of the rest are pretty similar. If you look towards the bottom 6 at the Albert Hall, there are some anomalies. Northwest has 12 bottom 6 finishers at the Open. and
Yeah.
only 6 at the Albert Hall. So there's
Again, there's more
uh,
northwest bands though.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, instead of just fairies and Fodens, you're occasionally getting bands like Milnrow, Wingates, Ashton, whatever. It's in certain times. Forgive me if I've missed any names. I'm just picking these off the top of my
Yeah.
head.
I must caveat this. There's no London and Southern counties have competed at all in the Open in the last 10 years. And
Yeah.
likewise, the north of England, none have competed for the last 6. Sorry,
Well,
6 have got through in the last 10 years.
so
So
there have
excuse
been
it.
no London and Southern Counties bands that
No,
have competed at all at the Open in the
no.
last 10 years. So it begins to paint a picture of where the strong regions are, and maybe this isn't news to anybody. I don't know, but
No, I
the
think it's
statistics
common
are.
knowledge, isn't it? But it's nice to look at some statistics to
It's
work this.
it's nice to look at things that bear
Yeah,
it out. The
yeah,
north of England, they have only had bands compete at 6 of those last 10 years.
yeah,
So there have been 4 years when there have been no northeast bands as well.
yeah.
There are no other regions that are as underrepresented as those two. So there's so much information in there. What do we pick
So
out that?
what this is clearly telling me, Sandy, that of our 86 championship bands, there's a massive differential in standards. A contest
Yeah,
within a
well,
contest.
I think purely from these figures, there's a massive difference as to where these bands are based.
Yeah,
For a start, I think some of the most pertinent figures are, you have, apart from your top 4 at London, you've got 2 finishers from each area. So Yorkshire sends 2, everybody sends 2. Yeah. Yorkshire has managed to capitalise on that, and
yeah,
they've got more bands into the top 6.
yeah,
Um, the way it's even set up now is there is no reason whatsoever that an area like London, who has 0 top 6 finishers, they could have, as many as 4, 5, 6 in the top 6.
yeah.
But what they've got to first do is get bands into the top 6. They pre-qualify, and then they'll send those 2 bands and another 2. But it's never happened,
No,
right? So what you've got to begin to question is how many of these bands are really competitive with the top bands we have. But it beggars all sorts of questions. And going back to when we discussed the European and the way that contest has gone, and when it was changed and they started having 2 separate draws. They always had the set test with their own choice, but 2 separate draws, big longer pieces. A lot of the foreign countries, the up and coming foreign, well, they were up and coming, they're now up.
up and above.
The Norways, the Switzerlands, the Belgiums, all that sort of thing. Those bands are used to competing in the national championships like that.
Yeah.
So they are preparing
For the
2 test
European.
pieces. Yeah. Like, for that sort of format.
And it is a difficult discipline. Having done it so many times, it's really difficult.
It is
Getting
hard.
yourself up for one piece, finishing one, and then getting yourself up again to to be able to play at your best on the second one. Very difficult.
I mean, it beggars the question, if British bands are going to be really competitive at the European again, and I make no apologies at the minute, we are talking about the top end of bandit, right? I don't care who wins the European. I want it to be a British band, obviously. I would be highly delighted. If we're going to give these bands a chance to compete in these contests, how can we help them? How can we go about doing it, right? So we've talked about some of these things before, about are there just too many bands at the Albert Hall? Are there too many bands in the Open even?
Yeah, I think so.
And how do we allow our top bands to really be able to compete with these bands who are now the norm for the Icangers and the Trezzy 12s of the world and the Villabrooks is two test species preparing all the time. And you know,
Yeah.
we've both done it umpteen times, right?
Yeah.
It's not so much about the toll it takes on your lip, it's the toll it takes mentally as well.
Yeah.
Preparing two contrasting pieces with different things on you. You have to raise your game again 2 days on the trot and prepare like
Yeah.
that. It's a hell of a mental ask to
Yep.
do that. How can we help our bands to be better prepared for that? And again, we know that the length of test pieces at the moment there are certain uh,
Well, there's
curtails.
limitations because of the amount of bands that's in
Yeah,
these contests.
there is. And are those bands that are there making up the bottom six? Are they really competitive with the top six?
Yeah.
I'm not sure that. Is it just time to admit that we don't have 86 championship section bands of a broadly similar standard? Because as far as those statistics are concerned, they're not of a broadly similar standard,
No,
are
they're
they?
not. No.
Um,
I don't know
it's
what the answer is, to be honest. I'd love to hear from some of our listeners what their thoughts are.
yeah. I mean, absolutely. This isn't us trying to sort of advocate one thing or another. It's just trying to get a bit of a discussion going. I remember years ago, maybe not that long ago, 7 or 8 years ago, I had a long discussion with a very, very well respected adjudicator who has hung up their whistle now,
Mm,
and uh, saying about this very subject: how many championship section bands are there? And
mm,
I ventured during the conversation. I said to him, I says, well, I thought I'll really go for it, right? We at then we were about 88 bands or something at the time, I think, as far as I remember.
yeah.
And I said, well, is there? I thought I'll stick my neck out here and I'll try and push it down. And I said, hmm, what, is there 30 that are really championship section? And I thought I was going to get a telling off then, right? And it would
Yeah.
have felt like a telling off knowing the person. And he says, really, Sandy? You think there's that many? And I thought, whoa. And I thought, crikey, right, if this is the most respected judge we've had in the last 30 years and doesn't think there's 30 championship section bands that are competitive, we need to start thinking about this.
It's
And
very telling, isn't it?
yeah, it is. So I don't know. It's not trying to denigrate, those bands, but we do have. Is there so much discrepancy now in a wide range of standards in any of the other sections in 1, 2, 3, and 4?
I don't believe there is.
I don't think there is, because if you look at the results for all these, it can be any band from any region can win the nationals, the lower
Yeah.
sections, and have done it. You know,
Yeah.
you have a real mixture of bands. You get bands starting in the fourth section and sorting themselves out well, like Chewit, Silver with Martin Hall we had on last time.
Yeah.
They've come up, started fourth section. We can all name bands that have done that in
Yeah.
the regions. We in Scotland years ago we had Kilmarnock Concert Brass, we had
Yeah.
Fallhouse Miners Youth. They sort of started in the fourth section, came up through, and ended up in championship section for a while. So it can
Mm,
be done. It's maybe easier than perhaps people would think to do that
yeah.
if you
Yeah.
keep the same band and keep a band working and all together and all that. But I think that in the lower sections there's a variety of bands that can win. I don't in the top section. You look at the winners of the Open, the National, and uh, the Open and the National for the last God knows how many years.
I
When
bet
do you
it
have
doesn't
to
go
go?
out. I bet it doesn't go outside two or three bands.
When do you have to go back to find a sort of slightly um, strange, well, not a strange result because the bands probably did deserve to win on that occasion, but it's a long time, isn't it, since there wasn't a Black Dyke, Foden's, Corey, Tadiga. Brighouse.
I remember
Maybe
years
Grime
ago,
and
Sandy, when Kennedy Swinton and
yeah,
Marple came
that's
in,
right.
but it's actually now in the fullness of time not a great surprise because them bands were led by Gary
Yeah,
Cook. He knows what he's doing,
yeah, they
and
were.
you know a lot of them players went on for really good careers in real big name bands.
Yeah, they did. So
So
yeah,
to
people
me,
like
it wasn't
Helen.
a surprise. I actually heard a Marple on that, and they were superb.
Yeah, yeah. So, but it's a bit like the football as well. Sorry for the football analogy again, but um, you used to get the Notts Forests of the world winning the European Cup, and but look at it now. It's dominated, isn't it,
Yeah, it is.
by the same four or five all the time. Um, so we're basically saying, are there sections within this championship section?
Well, I know my thoughts
Realistically,
on that, and I do think it's time for us to look at making it more competitive and helping these, like you quite rightly say, these bands prep for the European. Um, I just think that we've got to give them more chance. What worries me slightly is putting a championship over 2 days, the costs of that. But that's not really for me to worry about. All I want is competitive banding, and at the minute, I don't feel we have it in the so-called championship section.
I think there is. I think there's a section within the championship. It's already there. Whether
Yeah,
I know people keep actually saying, or we don't want an elite section. We don't want a whatever you're going to call it, a premier section or whatever. It doesn't really matter what you call it. It's already there. It
yeah.
is already there. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this discussion. We'd be saying there's bands being competitive all over the place. There's 15 or 20 bands vying for these competitions all the time. There isn't. There's four or five.
But you see as well, Sandy, if it was narrowed down into like a Premier League or something, them bands can play these really rock hard test pieces,
Yeah,
and the bands that are really not at that level can develop better by playing pieces that are much more accessible to them and not giving
I,
them sleepless nights and all this sort of thing that
I
goes with
think
it.
you're right. I think you're right. I think if you divided this into two, right, you would have a cracking contest between 10, a dozen bands maximum, like they do in Norway, like they do in Switzerland.
Yeah,
Um, and your standard would go up.
it would.
But also, I think it would benefit the bands that at the moment are constantly being knocked back and hampered because even the test pieces we're choosing at the minute are causing
Too
problems.
difficult
Yeah,
because they're probably in the wrong section.
well,
They're not at
it's
the
it,
minute,
it's
but
no,
but
but
you know
it's
what I'm
just
saying. It's
it's
just
too much.
yeah.
It's too much for them to make. I remember reading years ago that mouthpiece.com
Mm.
um, internet forum thing, and somebody was on about St Magnus, and and somebody he played with a band I'd never really come across. Oh yeah, we performed St Magnus. We played that at the regions, the areas in whatever it was, 2013 or something.
Mm.
And I thought, no, you didn't, because St Magnus is a mega piece. And
It's bloody
again,
difficult.
there's it's single figures in this country who could perform St Magnus properly.
Properly. Yeah.
Properly,
Yeah.
yeah. And there's a difference between scraping through start to finish
Yeah.
and sort of ignoring all the things that are going wrong and sort of getting swept up in the occasion and thinking you've performed it. I think we could help develop bands. It's a bit like the championship section and the first section at the minute. All right. The standard of first section pieces, I think, has gone up in the last 4 or 5 years because we've
Yeah.
got all this music from any year at all back on the table, good stuff. Um, and the standard of pieces has gone up as well. And I think that eventually will start to drip feed in, and bands will be of a better standard. The bands that can hack that and can improve and can show consistency over a few years will get the reward in the
I
end.
believe so too.
I think that's important.
Yeah,
So I would say, yeah, we do have a level above the championship section at the minute,
yeah.
that where bands are truly competitive with each other. What we call it, don't know, you know. And it's
I
no
think
slight
what is
on,
important, Sandy, is that we keep the pyramid of banding.
yeah.
But I just think this pyramid's a bit the wrong way around at the minute. But it needs readjusting. But that's another conversation altogether. But um, the reason we're having this discussion tonight is we were talking about the top section and the fact that there is sections within a section, and we thought, oh, let's just have a chat online about that and see if we can get readers to respond to it. And
I would love to get some response to it and see what's going to happen, because there's a couple of points to be made about the standard of test pieces, right?
yeah,
I mean, we are, there's no bones about it. We are trying to pick pieces that are going to get the best bands to the Albert Hall, if we're talking about the Nationals, right? So these pieces are going to be hard. They've got to be hard,
yeah,
okay? Um, when you start getting bands struggling badly with these pieces,
mm,
then you have to start questioning whether those bands are in the right place.
yeah,
Um, I think if you notice, if when the test pieces come out, some people will complain about how difficult the test piece is for the top section.
yeah,
I never hear the Black Decks of the world complaining, or the Corys of the world, or the Fodens, or the Brighouses. They just batten down the hatches and get on with it.
yeah,
You know, it, they just get on with it.
yeah,
Um, it's the bands that are going to struggle that are going to complain about it. And to me, that just points that if you're not getting any bloody fun out of it and any enjoyment, if you're always just on the back foot all the time and just trying to muddle through, then you are in the wrong section.
yeah.
I think, I mean, there are huge arguments to be made about opening up a really competitive um, second tier. If you take the top guns out of it, yeah,
Yep.
maybe, how many would you say in a truly a competitive top section, whatever you want to call it? How many bands is there out of those 86? 20?
If that, I'm not sure
So
there is 20.
I mean, how you get to that, I don't know.
Right.
But the rest of those bands would be far better off, and I'm sure would have far more enjoyment if they were actually winning contests,
Yep.
doing,
It goes back to this thing about, I mean, I've never been asked at a concert, what section are you in? All they're there
no,
is to enjoy music.
yeah,
No,
nobody gives
nobody's
a monkeys.
bothered.
Yeah, and a lot of bands, I think, they want it on their website, don't they? We're
They do, and
championship
I
section.
don't get it, but they do, yeah.
I don't know what it means, really. And they will want to be seen as being championship section internally within their own organisation or within other local bands, maybe. I don't know. Um,
For me, Sandy, it's got to be miles better for everybody to be competitive at their
mm,
level.
absolutely. Yeah, I do get that. And yeah, here's a silly example, right? My football team in Scotland, Airdrie, won a trophy last year. It was brilliant,
Mm,
and it was only against the second, third, and fourth tier teams out of the
yeah,
four tiers in Scotland. But they still won it, and it was
yeah.
a great occasion, and it was highly celebrated, and it was silverware, and you would have thought by the reaction of the players and the fans that they won the World Cup, And I would imagine that's going to be the same for any of these bands that are not having to compete against those 4 or 5, 6 bands that we mentioned,
Yeah.
um, to gain more experience of winning for a start, or
Well,
succeeding. Let's put it this way: gain more experience of succeeding with the pieces they're playing, rather than
absolutely.
hanging on by the skin of their teeth. You
I
know,
love going and supporting my wife's band when they were down in the third and second sections, and they were quite successful. And at the end of it, they were knocking pots over left, right, and centre, and the joy in them people's expressions and actions, it was just lovely to watch. And
Yeah,
they worked their
it's
way
all,
up, right
it's
up.
all relative. I mean,
Yeah.
I remember a couple of years ago in Scotland, I think I might have mentioned this. Apologies if I have. I judged the fourth section, um, and the band in the fourth section got third prize,
Mm.
right? The woman who was sat on stage, you would have thought she'd won the World Cup, right?
It's
She
lovely.
was ecstatic, right? And afterwards, she was there. She was holding the third place trophy in her hand, and all her colleagues were sat in the stalls in Perth Concert Hall, and she was screaming her head off, and they were all cheering, and it was just joyous to see. And
Yeah.
I'd had a word with her afterwards and said, "This is the first time we've had a prize for anything, right?" So it didn't matter one iota that it was third place in the full section, right?
Yeah, she was just
Uh,
thrilled.
it was just thrilled. I mean, I remember, occasions coming out of the Albert Hall and a blooming, you know, I know I was notorious for being, moaning and stuff, but we, sitting on the bus moping and angry because we got second,
Yeah,
you
I'm a
know.
bit like that.
Um, but so it pays to just readjust your thoughts and think, there is more to it than that. And I would just like to see more bands. I think bands would improve. I think bands
Yeah,
would improve, and they would be
completely
playing
agree.
pieces that they could have a proper go at.
Yeah.
I mean, well, this is another discussion we could have in future about choosing own choice test pieces, because the amount of times I've seen bands totally overstretch themselves
Mm,
and disastrously.
yeah.
Uh,
That's another
but then
subject for another day, though,
it
isn't it?
is, but then they can come back and say, "Oh yeah, we played Paganini variations when we were in the second section." Well, really? I'd love to hear it. It doesn't work like that. I mean, to go back to the football analogy again, is it a bit akin to lumping the bands, the clubs in the football championship, right? So we're talking about the second tier of English football, right?
Yeah.
If we just lump them all and into the Premier League and say we're doubling the size of the Premier League, you're all Premier League teams now,
Yeah.
right? Is that gonna is that really going to work? Or what will happen there, and you'll know what would happen there, all those teams would get pastings week in, week out
Absolutely.
from the Man Cities and the Arsenals and the Liverpools of the world, right?
Yep.
It's almost happening a bit like that at the minute, you know.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
is this where we sort of are, you know?
Yeah.
So are we really just talking about making our major contests more competitive? Yes or no? What do you think?
Yeah.
I think if we reduce the number of bands, then, well, again, going back to that old English Nationals contest at Preston, okay, and it became, there were certain bands pressed for it becoming two test species instead of one, and we
Yeah.
know why,
Yeah.
because it knocks out 70% of your opposition, because the British bands are not used to doing that.
No.
Yeah, one or two are, not many. So it makes the one or two more likely to win.
Yeah.
So how do we do it? We have to reduce the number of bands. How? We could invite the top six back at London
Right.
and only the regional winners.
Yep.
How many would that give? Six
So that.
and 8, 14.
Yep.
Or you could have the top four at London and the 8 regional winners. That would give you 12 bands. I
It's
don't know.
still a lot for two test pieces, though, isn't it?
12 isn't. I don't
No.
know how you would do it. I mean, again,
But
there are
you
far
could
more.
play longer pieces, couldn't you?
You could play longer pieces for a
Yeah.
start, which would it be in itself a benefit to those bands who were going to compete in Europe, right?
Yeah.
It would give them more chance. And because we noticed that when we were on about talking about test species before, And we had players asking for longer test species. I get that. They're players from these bands.
Yeah.
I understand why. And this is one of the reasons which we're trying to address now. With doing that, it doesn't negate people coming from different geographical locations, but it rewards achievement rather than just where your band is. Yeah, because if you
Yes.
look back to those top six, bottom six from London,
Yeah.
there are some bands heavily represented, some regions heavily represented: Yorkshire, Wales, Northwest, the ones you would imagine. There are some regions not represented at all, you have to say.
Yeah.
But nothing's to stop those bands getting into the top six. But
Nope.
they have to be proven to do it. But to keep it the way it is, I would argue at the moment that this championship section, keeping it with such a vast number of bands, is hampering the top end
Yeah, I agree.
developing. I know that'll probably be quite controversial, but I am really, people have said this for years that they were going to. There's one of those books, Labour and Love, Arthur Taylor book, and people are interviewed on there. I think Graham Gay's interviewed and saying, bear in mind this book was written 25 years ago.
Yeah.
Saying that in 40 years' time, he says, you'll be lucky if a British band qualifies for the European.
Really?
They'll have overtaken us. I'll dig it out and find the exact quote. But this is where we're almost getting at now. British bands are struggling a bit
Yeah.
in the European, and I want them to be at the top table in banding. I want those 4 or 5 bands more than that to be there all the time, snapping on the heels of the Ikangers of the world and all that sort of thing. I think it's only good for banding to make that happen.
It is. Yeah.
I would argue maybe that the top bands are suffering from a result of not using that formula of set piece on choice
I
that
completely agree with that.
European counterparts have.
I don't think people realise how much more difficult that is.
Yeah, I think it is putting British bands at a disadvantage. And I know we'll get complaints now about, oh, you're always on about top bands and all that. Well, yeah, because there has to be, these will be the same people that will be tuning in every week to watch Man City and Liverpool and Arsenal and whoever else, with the million dollar budgets and all this sort of thing. They'll be quite happy to watch all that. But when it comes to banding, they want things to be, don't want any bands sort of getting away from the pack. They're already away from the pack. You could argue by those statistics that's already happening.
Yeah.
So, somewhat, what makes a top band then?
Well, I think it's performing at a consistent, very high level of playing, not just in contests, but in everything they do. Things, concerts, recordings, and everyday rehearsals. I've been and helped bands out, top bands, and you go to a rehearsal before a concert that you're depping for, and you think, really?
I know.
Do you really think you're going to perform on Saturday? But I've also played in other bands, as you know, with you, and the standard is incredible.
Yeah,
I'll never forget Jim Scott, when he came and took a rehearsal and a concert at Black Dyke. And after the rehearsal, he came down the stairs and he says, good night, gentlemen. I'm absolutely amazed at the standard outside a concert and a contest. He couldn't believe it.
Right.
And
I mean, that's just the way we were brought up, and we weren't the only ones.
yeah,
There were other bands doing that as well. But you were taught on pain of death almost that you were expected to play at that standard all the time.
all the time.
I don't ever remember consciously thinking, right, that's the area done. I can sit back on my backside until September. No, I wouldn't have been out the band by April.
Oh, easy.
So I think this is what we're trying to do is suggest that there are bands that are already away from the pack.
Yeah.
And I would like to think that those bands, yeah,
they've got to be performing at the top level, absolutely all the time.
yeah, and that's what was going back to this thing about winning one contest and saying you're a top band. No,
No,
I'm sorry.
no.
It's doing it week in, week out, and all that. But I would be really interested to hear anyone's thoughts on this, as to say, what the real question is, and we go back to the basic question: what constitutes a championship section standard band?
Absolutely. I'd
And
love to
and
hear
and
some thoughts.
see what people come back with.
Yeah.
Um, I
We
think
have
there'll
we
be
have got an
a
email
variety.
address now, Sandy,
Yeah,
for people to send stuff in, and it's smithandgrezzy@gmail.com. So if any of us listeners have got any questions, please fire them in there. I noticed we've had one or two today, which I'll send over to you, Sandy,
yeah.
and we'll bring it to the table. But that's about
No,
it, Sandy, for this week, I'm afraid.
yeah, no
Um,
problem.
so we'll look forward to the next Smith and Grezzy next week, and it'll be a different topic altogether. But I hope you've enjoyed the program this week. What constitutes a championship section band? Huge question mark. So thank you, listeners, and we'll see you next week.